Okay, excellent. So as we said, that we were going to take the next couple of sessions to do a review on where we've gotten until this point, since we've already gone through basically half the letters at this point. And I think it would be good to do a review, not just in order to be able to maintain the information, but as someone brought up, the whole point of this book is that there's a progression from the beginning of the alphabet to the end of the alphabet, and each letter kind of builds on each other, on the previous one. So to go back and try to review the thematic progression of how we're moving forward in the alphabet could be helpful. So we'll start with Aleph, and we'll see what comes up in people's minds. I think also what's going to happen is that people are going to trigger the connections in people's mind with the other letters as go. Like the different points of contact between the different letters is gonna come up. So Os Aleph. I think that to summarize Os Aleph, we're talking is really an introduction to the dynamic of language itself, because we spoke about how all forms of language, all language inherently is a form of outward progression, of outward projection, and with outward projection, there's always a bit of authenticity that's lost. And Rav Kook says that this is alluded to in the idea that the Aleph is the Aramaic word for teaching, ulpan. Ulpan means to teach. And so this is alluded to in the pasuk in Mishlei, Alefcha bina, that I will teach you understanding. Aleph means to teach. And this idea of the outward projection, so Rav Kook ties this into the mystical idea known as the Tardema. The Tardema means, this term brought up in the Torah twice. There's twice this term is brought up in the Torah, one by Adam Arishon, one by Avram Avinu, that there is this type of disconnect from consciousness, a retreat from consciousness that brings a person access to knowledge that he would otherwise be unaware of, and then he comes back to reality, so to speak, and needs to put the pieces together. So it's kind of like waking up from an intense dream and trying to orient yourself with what is the significance of the dream that I just had to the experiences that I'm having. That was Adam's experience, and that was also Avram's experience. Adam had the experience of the Tardema, waking up as a being that was unwhole, right, existentially unwhole, and then he wakes up to a new reality. Avraham, it's a little bit more explicit what he sees. He has this whole vision of the split parts, as it is, the Bein HaBetarim, the Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant between the parts. He sees this fire and the oven and the smoke and all these things, which is a premonition of the Gullus situation. Anyway, not getting into the weeds of that. But again, the underlying theme of the Aleph, which is the Targum, again, the Targum being not Lashon HaKodesh, not the language of pure, unadulterated authenticity, but the Targum, something that you're struggling to find the modality of expression, and it's difficult to find the right way to express yourself. Yeah, all language, all forms of expression are dealing with this problem. Any outward projection. I think we brought the Gemara in Nida that talks about the famous description of how when a child is born, so they are given access to, the term used is kol Torah kula. They're given access to the entire breadth of divine wisdom, and then when they come out, they have this experience of be given a strike on the mouth, and that strike on the mouth causes them to forget the whole Torah. And as many of the commentaries explain, the Maharal, chief among them, says that this strike on the mouth is the ability to speak. It's giving the mouth the ability to function. So the mouth being given its function, meaning the externalizing component of the mind of trying to communicate outward, of being superficial, that aspect of the consciousness disconnects someone from authenticity. Yeah. So we talked about how when a person experiences how either they themselves doing this, or listening to someone else do it, talking too much, talking like it becomes either a word salad, or the person is just speaking, just sophisticated emptiness. You realize that the words aren't doing anything. The words are taking you further and further away from the truth, as opposed to closer and closer to the truth. So all language deals with this struggle. And the Aleph being silent, you haven't even started speaking. You're just in the modality of speaking. You're just entering the modality of speaking. That entering modality of speaking is bringing the person face to face with the fact that it's a struggle. Authenticity is a struggle. It's a very, very big struggle. So the Aleph is honing in on that. and I think the Musar that we did speak out at the time is to be aware of this, to be aware that all speech is an attempt to get closer to authenticity as opposed to project superficiality, which is a very, very easy thing to slip into. That was the message of the Aleph, right? Aleph Chabina. Huh? The shape back this up somehow. We spoke right. So we spoke briefly about how the Aleph has three fundamental forms. There's the Vav in between, and then there's the Yud on the top and the Yud on the bottom. Yeah, symbolizing how there's the complete construct. That's what the Yud is symbolizing. We already got to the Yud. The Yud is expressing the full shiur koma, as is the mystical jargon, the full construct, a full unit. Let's say. We'll simplify our terms. So there's the unit up above, and then there's the unit down below, and then there's a partition that's separating them, but it's also kind of like it's the permeable membrane that's trying to express. So just to bring this down to a much more mundane example, we have the experience within that we're trying to project outward. That is a very, very delicate and almost artistic process. It's the Aleph, it's the Yud up above, being projected outward to the Yud down below, and there's a Vav in between them. There's a Vav that's connecting them. That's the medium, so to speak. That's the dynamic of the Aleph. Is there any point that people had when they were listening to this? We did actually pretty good at the 10-minute slot. We're doing pretty good. We're on a roll. Yeah. We're fine. No? Nothing? That is beautiful. Yeah. Sure. Huh? Connecting the upper to the lower. Yes. There's also an idea, by the way, this could be like I don't have total clarity on this point, but there is an idea that the upper, so to speak, Yud is on the right as opposed to the bottom Yud is on the left. And we've talked about the directionality of the letters, the fact that right is always referring to the beginning. It's the beginning of the process. Always, even geographically, right? It starts from the east and ends in the west, which is not a coincidence because it's the direction of the sun as well, right? The sun rises in the east and ends with the west. It's kind of like the natural progression of things is in going in that direction. So you start from the right, which is always the east, and ends in the west. So the top Yud, again, the top Yud is more connected to source. It's also higher, like more lofty, more ethereal, and it's also connected to its original content much more. The second Yud is already progressing outward. It's doing the outward movement to the left. Yeah. There is one point that I'm remembering now, which I don't think we spoke about at the time, which is, I think we did actually, this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu is described as someone who has difficulty speaking. Moshe is described as someone who has difficulty speaking. And the shot of that, the simple understanding of that is that Moshe is in a realm of consciousness that it is fundamentally difficult to express oneself. It's fundamentally difficult. The Midrash that we are all familiar with about how baby Moshe is brought before Paro and given the test to see whether he's going to be a problematic individual or a less problematic. They got that one wrong, right? To see if he was going to be, right, if he was going to cause trouble. Yeah. So they bring before him a bowl of coals and a bowl of jewels. And if he goes for the jewels, that means he has high ambitions and we got to get rid of them. And if he goes for the coals, then he's okay, right? So he's going for the jewels, and the angel, but also the angel that like deals with speech. There's angels dealing with speech here, that he moves his hand to the coals, and in response to that, he takes a coal and puts it on his mouth and burns his mouth. Yeah. What does that mean? Like symbolically, what is this trying to say? What it means is that when Moshe is in the domain of Pharaoh, Moshe is speechless. He doesn't speak. When he gets out of Pharaoh's domain, he begins to speak. To the extent that Moshe, and by extension the Jewish people, are under the domain of Paro, divine speech can't enter the world, which is why, and this is constantly an overlooked detail, we're getting to Pesach, this is an important thing to start thinking about. Whenever Moshe communicates with God, he always says, I have to leave the city first. Like, I have to get out of here first. What? Except for at the very end, correct? One of the Makos, he had to go. You're right. There's one of the Makos that's true. Which one it is escaping me right now. But he's constantly saying, "Kitsesi esa'ir." When I leave the city, and I'll pray for you and to stop the plague, or I'll get the message from God to get back to you. Like he can't speak when he's in Paro's domain. So symbolically, what this midrash is trying to say is that the limitations of Moshe's speech. Again, Moshe's speech is not just Moshe's speech; it's the divine speech coming into the world is being prevented by the paro energy. The paro energy being the stopper, the thing that's stopping authentic communication from entering the world. So that's the message of the Aleph. To constantly be aware of this. To constantly be aware that we are in a tension between the tools of communication, which are fundamentally outward facing, and we're trying to use those things in order to communicate authenticity. And it speaks a lot to the struggle of authenticity. But just being aware that we're in the struggle is already 90% of the battle. I think the other 10% to like hone the skills and get better at it. But to be aware of that, just to be aware of that dynamic is the very profound musa. See if I have anything written over here that's worth that we didn't. I think we covered it. I think that's everything. Tov. Os Aleph, good, doing well. So Os Beis. So the Rav opens up with a very powerful line in Os Beis. Beis, or bayit, right, means house, structure. So Beis achrei sheyesh tochen, after the beginnings of content, because the Aleph is triggering the beginnings of rather the entering into speech. We haven't yet created speech yet, but it's the enterings into speech. Sheyesh natsura rashit harekan tiferet adam l'shevach bayit tzrichem kfar la'achin beit kibul el hatsurot hamitavot. So this is in order to create the vessels, in order to give expression to the light. Petichato shel habeit einenu mul ha'alef. The opening of the bays, the open side of the bays, is not facing the aleph. It's facing the left. Again, the left being forward facing, moving forward, outward. לעומת צורה המופשטת הכוללת כל בקרבה, כי לעומת הרכוש הבא המוגבל על כל פנים באיזה מובן, עד כדי להיכנס בתיאור וחשבון, so that it can go into the world of being expressed and calculated, being given concrete form. הציור אשר יישאר בתעלומה, the form that will stay in a hidden, in its hidden state, בעומק הדממה, in the depths of slumber, ראוי לו להתעכב על ידי מסיפס. It is necessary to stop that through a small partition. This is the first time that Rav Kook uses this term, the mesifas, the small kind of semi-permeable partition. This is referring to the right side of the bays, which is a thin partition that's up against the aleph. This is the first time that we see this theme. It comes up again. We talked about it in Nos Chaf. I'm sure it'll come up again. Is the idea that as we're becoming more and more concrete, it requires a cutting off. The bays is about the first beginnings of cutting off from the world of the ethereal, perhaps the world of the spiritual as a whole. First of all, we have the mesifas, the small, semi-permeable partition, which is the vertical line on the right-hand side, that's cutting us off from the aleph, because we don't want to be in the world of slumber. We want to be externally facing the world. We want to be in the thick of things. We want to escape the slumber. That's one aspect. And the horizontal lines, the two parallel horizontal lines, one on top and one on the bottom, are the guardings from the different phenomena that can cause distraction. What are the two phenomena that can cause distraction? The temptation from above and the temptation from below. The temptation from above is to remain in the world of the ethereal, the world of the abstract, the world of the intellect, which prevents someone from taking action. This can be expressed by overthinking. This can be expressed by making things too complicated. This can be expressed by remaining in the ideal and being afraid of the version not being, a perfect expression of the ideal. Right? That's the distraction from above. Distraction from above, right? The spiritual temptation to not take action. And what's the distraction from below? Distraction from below are all of our temptations and distractions and primal urges that take us down, drag us down. Right? So the base is the beginning of the building of the house. The house is in order to save someone from the elements. You have a house because you don't want to be exposed to the rain and the thunder and the tornadoes all the time. You want to be inside something that can protect you. So to be able to function, so this is the next step, so to speak. Once we get into the modality of the aleph and we recognize what it is that we're trying to do, the impossible task of trying to express inner authenticity in an externalized way. Once we understand that, now we need to start building the tools in order to be able to do that, to be able to actually give expression. And what is step one of being able to give proper in a state of focus? When we talk about these ideas, the thing that comes to mind often is the well-known prayer of the Rambam that for the doctor, that the Rambam says that the doctor needs to, before he approaches the patient, he needs to turn to God and beg God to save the patient. And then when he steps into the room and starts treating him, he has to treat the patient as if his life is dependent on what he does. Yeah, like in that moment, he has to say, like, if I don't do this right, the guy's gonna die. It's 100% dependent on me. So to live with that tension, it's like Aleph, Bez, moving, right? We know the abstract ideal, right? That God is in charge of everything, God runs the world, all that's very nice. But once you step into action, you need to be in the house. It's like it's closing off, to a sense, from the spiritual ideal, which is very counterintuitive, right? From a highly spiritual system, to say that part of spirituality is learning how to cut yourself off from being tied to this idealism and etherealism. It's literally the second word, and it's the first word of the Torah, right? It's the first letter of the Torah, which also says a lot. That's also some food for thought. What about this concept is unique to the first letter of the Torah? I would say that the first letter of the Torah is about giving content. It's about being able to give us actual words to express godliness. That's that's the purpose of the Torah. So it's not right, in light of this idea that we're talking about, it kind of makes sense that the Beis would be the first letter of the Torah. And cover everything over here. What did I write over here? Komo Gidre Hata Shehim Chelik Metifkud. Right. Shmuel, at the time, you gave us the term the semi-permeable membrane. That the Mesifas, right, as opposed to the thick line, Rav Kook makes the distinction between the thick lines of the letters and the thin lines of the letters. This is what we mentioned. There's the Mesifas, the vertical line on the right-hand side, which is a semi-permeable membrane, because we don't want to cut ourselves completely off of the ideal. We want to have the ideal in our mind, but we also don't want to be distracted by it. But the thick lines are the hard partitions from distraction, because we don't want to be distracted at all. We don't want to be open to distraction even by a little bit. We want to be thick walls preventing any distraction from coming in. Just like a screen door is probably not a good thing to have when the hurricane comes. Like you want to close the blast doors when that happens. And Tov. So that's Os Beis. Os Gimel. I remember this one. This was a good one. Os Gimel. So Achrei Shabo HaTchonim Shel HaYitavut LeGvulam. Once we've entered the world of Gvul, the world of form, of Gvul, boundaries, thank you. Once we've entered the world of boundaries, Ne'erchu HaMishkalim Elu Kineged Elu. So we are now in the domain of making measurements, Mishkal. Umitziut HaMishpat HaGomel. The first connotation of the word Gimel, as we explained, is Gomel, is just reward. We still haven't thought of a good word for that, right? Gmul. It's not exactly reward. It's both reward and punishment in the same word. Like just deserve, perhaps. Just deserve. Yeah. גם יתאר שאלו אשר היו כיונקים משדה האם, קשורים אל היסוד המחיה בראשית התגלות של כל היש, the developing consciousness that was tied to its source, like a small child is tied to the mother, nigmelu, they become weaned. The human beings are very unique in this way, that they're born kind of half-baked, right? Very interesting evolutionary reasons for why that is. Like human beings can't spend their full gestation inside their mother, because it would be impossible for the mother to give birth. They have to kind of come out small enough that they're not fully formed. The first 4 months of the child's life are much more similar to gestation than they are to the rest of the child's life. Right? There's a lot of sleeping, a lot of dormancy. There's not really much going on. Yeah. So that process of nigmelu, of being weaned, is really that's really the final break from source. That there's an emergence of independence. We see that by Yitzchak Avinu, that Abraham waits to have the celebration for his son Yitzchak until after he's weaned, which could probably have like some practical ramifications, because unfortunately back then there was kind of a doubt whether the child was going to make it until he get to a certain age, right? But more to, like, on a fundamental level, the fact that the child is weaned means that the child achieves a certain level of independence. Right? He's not fully mature in his consciousness and his experiences, obviously, but now he becomes independent. So that's the second connotation of Gimel. Nigmelu. Alidei tunatam ha'atzmit. He talks about the form of the letter Havav Shabaot, right? The Gimel is made of two forms. There's the Vav, and then there's a small Yud on the bottom left. On the bottom, where the forms experience pain and darkness. Yechelu haribui. that is where the expansion of multiplicity comes in. The small yud-like protrusion that connects the yud to the gimel. Because the descent from the higher levels to the lower levels is what causes the material reality to be revealed. The closing off of the quality, is what causes the quantity to be revealed. So gay omek mal dibur. Very interesting. So he says that the final connotation of the word gimel is gay mal. Gay means very deep, right? Like gay ben hinom, like the valley of Hinnom, gay Hinnom. And mal means to speak, right? Like the malel, right? Speech. So the it's the descent of speech. So now we're getting in as we're becoming more and more independent. You see, we can see this progression from Aleph to Beis to Gimel. And as we become deeper and deeper into speech, using more and more words to try to express, so the words become more and more in kamut, in quantity, but the quality begins to go down. However, what is achieved through this, the positive side of that, is that there's much more of a feeling of independence. That's the gomel side of the gimel, the just deserve. There can't be any just reserve without independence. That's the musar of the gimel. The musar of the gimel is, okay, you want reward, you want to be paid, you want to feel like you deserve something, so you need to be independent. Like the deserving, there's two sides of the reward coin, right? One side is you get paid, you get rewarded, but the other side is if you mess up, God forbid, you also experience the consequences of that. There's the yay mal, there's the descent. It's scary. The descent is scary. This idea of how Gemul reward necessitates this chasifa, this vulnerability of possible failure. So it's the Gemilah, the being weaned, the producing of independence, which allows Gemul, reward, and God forbid, the opposite of reward, to be a possibility. It's a possibility now. Now you're independent. Now you have to, So there's no such thing, right? Responsibility and let's say responsibility and privilege. What's a good word, right? Responsibility and privilege are two sides of the same coin. They're the two sides of the independence coin. Independence means responsibility and privilege, right? And that's the musar of the gimel. As we're getting more and more independent, we experience the dynamic of possibility of responsibility and privilege, and that's the gomel, right? The mishkal aspect, right? The two weighted sides of the scale. Even though we're going to get back to that concept in the Oschaf, which is what we did 2 days ago. Now we're going to expand on that more. Oh, we're doing very well with the time thing. I did not think this was going to go this well. Baruch Hashem, I'm so happy. I was very pessimistic coming in here. I'm like, we're going to spend forever on Osala, we're not going to get anywhere. Yeah.
How's it going to connect to the debate?
So I don't know if it's connected necessarily to Bays necessarily, but I think it's what it's saying is that it's the third step in the progression. That if Bays is the beginnings of formulating tools of expression, right? Creating the house, cutting ourselves off from spiritual idealism, cutting ourselves off from the ethereal and right, and creating the house for things to exist. The next step of that is the experience of self-independence. Yourself as an independent being that can make independent decisions. That's the nakuda that he said. The gomel is like the scales that allow, right, independent thought, like independent value judgment. Independent value judgment. So there's independence, which creates the possibility for value judgment, which creates the possibility for reward, which also creates the possibility for punishment, for failure. So all this is a progression. It's just the next step of progressing out, becoming more and more concretized. The consciousness is becoming more and more concretized. So this is that stage of independence. Yeah. Okay, we covered everything. Hatzmiut, right? Hatzmiut, the independence. Okay, fine. He has a little note over here about the motzah. There in Lashon HaKodesh, there are five motzaot, the different areas of the klei adibor, of the organs of speech that produce the letters. There are 5 categories. There are the guttural sounds, right, that are produced in the throat, the ayin, the chet, right? And then there's the letters that are produced by the palate, Gechik, Gimel, Chaf, and Kuf. The osios datlant, Daled, Lamed, Tet that are produced by the teeth, and then there's Boomf, the letters that are produced by the lips. Yeah, so he makes that connection that Gimel comes from this, right, the deep place in the throat, which is highlighting that point, how Gimel is the descent, the gay mal, like the descent of the words. Tov, Daled. Yeah, Daled was also a good one. So right, Hadalat HaSichlit, the Daled. Right, Daled has many connotations. What do we say the three connotations of Daled are? Daled is Dal, like to lidlot, like to draw up from a well. It also means delet, like door, and it also means dal, like poverty. Poverty, draw up, and door. And to summarize this, because I liked what we said in the conversation before, the dalut, the feeling of poverty, points you towards the door. I think we brought the commentary of the Bnei Yissaschar. He comments on the line from Slichos, right? Kedalim dafaknu delatecha, like poor, we bang on your door. Kedalim delatecha, we come to your door in poverty. Meaning the poverty moves you toward the opening, right? The only way out is through. So there's the next step in this progression is obviously, right, more existential angst, the feeling of the poverty of being, that there's like this constraint, this constriction of reality that gives you this feeling of poverty. Again, poverty just being lack, that's what it is. Less space, less resources, less room to maneuver. There's a constriction. However, that dalut is actually pointing you towards the door. It's not poverty and lack for the sake of poverty and lack, obviously, but it's rather the constriction that's guiding you, right? Sometimes the bottleneck is good. You say like, oh, I formed a bottleneck, right? But sometimes you want right? It's kind of like like the funnel that you use if you want to pour all the liquid into this one spot. You don't want any to be lost. You want the funnel. The funnel will guide. Yeah, so you can imagine like the wine going through the funnel. It's like, oh, it's so crowded in this funnel, but like you want the funnel to be crowded. So the dal is leading you towards the delet, which allows the dalah, right? Allows the ascent, right? I praise you, God, because you lifted me up. Lo simachto evaili, and you didn't allow my enemies to rejoice over me. The last point that he brings up is that structurally the Daled is at this 90-degree angle, which is alluding to the koach hamarbeh, right? In Lashon HaKodesh, or in the words of the prophets rather. So the idea of spreading out is always expressed in this idea of the arba kanfot haaretz, spreading out to the four corners of the earth. Moshe Rabbeinu already alludes to this when he says that eventually you guys will be all exiled, and you'll be exiled to the four corners of the earth, and God will bring you back from the four corners of the earth. Yeah. So the idea of the four corners, it's not a coincidence that the Os Daled, which is the fourth letter, is this 90-degree angle, which is even pictorially alluding to the idea of spreading out. Yeah. And the next letter, which is Os Hey, is just the Yud being in addition to that, is going to pick up on this theme more directly. See, some of the letters seem to be more connected to the previous letters than other ones. There is always a progression, but sometimes the progression is like a lot more clear than in other times. Like the Vav to the Zion, that was like very clear, the kind of that progression. The Dalet to the Hey was pretty clear. Yeah. But there's always a progression, but sometimes the progression seems to be tighter than other progressions. Yeah. You're gonna say something? Oh. Was that everything? Aleph Chachma. Okay. The commentary over here of Reb David brings kind of like a summary of the Aleph Bet Gimel Daled set, so to speak. He says he brings from the Arizal that these four letters are alluding to the four primary categories of the Shir Koma. The Shir Koma being the mystical construct of the spheros. Again, there's many ways to divide up the Shir Koma. There's many categories, as we've said. There's the Zer Anpin versus the Malchus. There's the Mochin versus the active attributes. There's many ways to divide it up. But there's also this way of dividing it up, which is four sections. The four sections are the Keter being the domain of will. That would be the Aleph, the domain of pure will. All things right, the Beis is alluding to the bina, the intellectual attributes, the ability to start thinking, and specifically thinking in concrete terms, not thinking in the abstract, but thinking about things. That's the beis, bina, bias. Gimel miyatzeg et midat hamishpat. The Gimel is alluding to the entire 7 lower active attributes. Why is that? And I think we spoke about this. This is an important point to keep in mind, that the dynamic of the section of the Shir Koma that we call the Zer Anpin, from Chesed through Yesod, the dynamic of what's happening in the Zer Anpin is all about balance. If you think about it, that's what's going on. Chesed, Gvura, 2 poles being balanced by Tiferes. Netzach and Hod being balanced by Yesod. It's all about extremes pulling at each other and finding balance. That's what's going on in Zer Anpin. So the Gimel, which is about the weighing and being able to measure out things and bring balance to things, that symbolizes the Zer Anpin. And the Daled represents the Malchus. It represents the active domain of application, right? Which is one of the central characteristics of Malchus, of the active domain, is Dalut, is this experience of poverty. Again, poverty in the sense of constriction, because once you get into the real world, you crash up against things and you feel the constraints of the world. So in summary, we have the Aleph, the purely ethereal, the Beis, being able to cut ourselves off from the ideal and start thinking in concrete terms, the Gimel, which is the achievement of full conscious independence, where we're able to make our own judgments, our own value judgments, which is a descent even deeper, because that independence, it draws us down deeper, further away from our source, but also gives us our own subjective independence and value judgment of the world. That's number 3. And number 4, the dalut, the feeling of constraint, but that feeling of constraint is actually guiding us to a certain direction. So the takeaway, I think the primary takeaway of the Os Daled is how we relate to feelings of constraint. Relating to feelings of constraint is always that it is the funnel leading you to the door, and not the walls closing in on you in order to crush you just for the fun of it. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Hey, Os hey. I'm so happy that we're doing well at the time. I can't tell you. I'm so grateful. Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for allowing us to be relatively good with the time over here. Os hey. So Rav Kook starts off with Os hey as the following. The Tziurim have now experienced more, please help me with the word again, Ephraim, Gvul? Boundary, thank you. Not sure why that's escaping me. The Tziurim, the forms, are experiencing more and more boundary. Torah lanu ha-hey bebituya. The hey, the actual word hey, is hey lachem zera, here, like I'm handing you something. Koach poel mefurad, koach badul bilti mechubar ba'atzmiutam. The disconnectedness of independence. Hakoach hapoel harehu abasis haomed bismola shel ha'peula. The koach hapoel, the active aspect, is the basis that stands on the left side of the actor. The left side of the actor here being that little yud that's disconnected. Lo et hamakom ha'atzmiuti hayemani hu tofes. It does not occupy the right position on the right side. Ki im et hamakom hamikri hatsurati mumuvan tsurat haprat, symbolizing the individual that has been distanced from the collective. Einenu gvul v'kalul b'tochan hatzirim atzmam, ki momed hu menutak mehem upoel b'kirbam. It is active within it. So I wrote over here, haprat hamotzei et atzmo b'toch ma'arechet hagvul upoel ba. Very interesting. So this point that he's making over here in this line that I just read, what Rav Kook is honing in on over there is that this stage of development is the realization that the individual is not just an individual floating around in space, but rather is facing a bunch of other individuals that they have to interact with. So that's why it's the letter. This is the only letter that's like this, that the letter has 2 parts that are not attached to each other. There's the yud that is symbolizing the detached prat, the detached individual, that is facing the daled, which is the riboy, as we said last time, the multitude. So it's the individual facing the multitude. Hey lachem zera. Okay, we read that. Havav or ayud sheba mora al eichut hamidinat or eichut hamisparit. Okay, I'll read a few lines. From the commentary over here. Omnam hahei mevatet nifradut. The hey, because it's this letter that has two distinct parts that are detached from each other and have to be detached from each other. Uh, Therefore, it symbolizes separateness. Ki davar she'atzah mimkoro ve'atah nivdal, something that comes out of its source and is now separated from its source. V'hi nivdelet michomer ve'omedet me'alav la'ashpia lo, ach hashpa'ata nishpat b'kirvat makom v'lo merachok. It only has the capacity to influence its immediate surroundings and not far away. V'koach sheba umitztaref el kochot hachayim hatachtonim. It is coming to join up with the forces of life down below. Haotziot Aleph ad Daled, the letters of Aleph through Daled. Tiaru et ha'atzilut ve'otei metaeret l'chora et olam ha'briyah. Very interesting. So the letters of Aleph through Daled. I think we actually made this point either last time or the time before that the letters of Aleph through Daled are much more ethereal, and the letters of Hey are now the letter Hey starts being much more concrete, because again, the main theme of Os Hey, I'm trying to hash out this point because I think this is the central point of Os Hey. It's the feeling of the individual being separate, but also realizing that it is facing the riboy, the multitude of the world. I wrote over here, Hamugbal eno to doches, elememad shebo efshar lootzi al hapoal, ele shekedai lootzi al hapoal, tzarich lootzi betoch ha'ma'arechet, v'chein hem divrei ma'aral b'ner mitzvah. Right, very interesting. I was mitzayin to what the Maharal writes in the introduction to Ner Mitzvah. I think we spoke about this in our Chabur on Hey. The Maharal in Ner Mitzvah speaks out this idea that the Dalet represents the spreading out to the four corners. That's what we talked about in Os Dalet. And the Hey represents the individual that's able to interact with that multiplicity. So it's like the Yud is the individual that's facing the multiplicity, but is able to have some interaction with it. So while there is the chaotic multiplicity, he finds himself in a more situated and oriented way that he's able to interact with that. So I think the primary takeaway, if we're going to sum it up in one line, it's being able to act in some orderly fashion within a tumult of chaos. I think that's the central takeaway. It's the individual that's separate and distinct and facing the multiplicity.
That's me.
Huh?
I love to be alone in the middle of a coffee shop.
There is something to that. I'll tell you. It's kind of like there's the solitude, but there's also independence within a system. The Hey is the independence within a system. It's not like the hermit who like lives in a cave all by himself. You're with things, but you have the sense of independence while you're within the system. That's the Hey. That's the Os Hey.
Not stepping on too many toes.
Not stepping on too many toes. Okay,
Right.
that's a good.
How to dance with the crowd, understand how to dance with society.
Yeah.
Remaining an individual.
I wrote a long thing over here. I don't know if we should read the entire thing. So he brings over here an interesting point from the Gra. He says as follows, that it is known that Kabbalistically that when the Sofer is writing the Hey, which part of the Hey do you write first? So should you write the Daled part of the Hey of the Hey first, or should you write the Yud part of the Hey first? It says Tzarich HaSofer lichtov tzior Hey rishona shel ha'avaya ba'ofen zeh Hey shot. No, excuse me, scratch that. It's not the question of which part of the Hey you write first. It's the question of how on in what way do you write the yud part? Is the yud is the yud upside down, or is the yud facing up, like with the leg pointing down or the leg pointing up? Most of the time we see Hayes written with the leg pointing up, like an upside down yud. But he says that there is a custom kabbalistically, right? Harishona shel havav ba'ofen zeh, that the first hay in the divine name should be written with the leg not pointing down, but like slightly on its side. Right? Excuse me, the yud not pointing down, but slightly on its side. שבתוך אות ההי תהיה ברגלית פסיעה אחת בולטת, אוקיי, לחוץ מן ההי, ולא לפנים ממש, בתוך ההי כלפי פנים. Right. He brings here from the Gra that's symbolizing the protrusion, so to speak, of the individual distancing himself more and more from the riboy, distancing himself more from the multiplicity. So it's like Daniel said, not stepping on too many toes, not the beginnings of ensuring that individuality doesn't conflict with the riboy, with the multiplicity that a person finds himself in, which is the challenge that's now confronted. The challenge that's confronted is being able to be an individual, but interacting with the multiplicity. Okay, shall we do one more? I think we can do one more. Yeah, I think we can do one more. Vav. Yeah. Hatochan amidadi. Yeah. So first of all, what does the word vav mean? The word vav means a connector. Yeah. So hatochan amidadi b'chol ma'uto, and also pictorially, it looks like a measuring stick. Mitpashetu lamata lematarata shel hitachdut hatochanim. It comes to unify all of the different qualities. Chachalakim hamafuzarim, all the parts that have become disparate, shebetzurot gomim mutzagim mitargenim. They become organized. Ha'ora'ah milulit hadikdukit shel avav, the literal meaning of the word vav, noseit alea gamken el tochen shel hachibur v'hayichud. Right, that's what vav means. The vav means that it brings things together, it connects things together. Hayichushiyut v'hitztarfut hamiviad birkat shalom. This is the result of the blessing of peace. B'chol davar shalem, with everything that is whole. Hamarevet et ha'atid ve'et ha'avar, which also brings together the past and the future. What does that mean, bringing together the past and the future? Right, we have a phenomenon, a very unique phenomenon in Hebrew grammar, that we have something called the vav ha'ipuch, that when you add a vav onto the beginning of the word, it changes around the tense of the word. So if we have a word that by itself would be in past tense, if you add a vav onto the beginning, it's now in future tense. What's the most famous example of this? Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. The word ahavta means you loved in the past. Ahavta means you loved. Ve'ahavta means you will love in the future. Yeah. Or the word vayehi, right? Yehi means will be. That's what the word like yehiyeh means, will be. Vayehi means there was in the past. Yeah. So this idea of connecting and being able to bring one thing from one context into another context, and this is called, what he says, the Brit Shalom. I remember this one. We talked about this also in the context of Parshas Pinchas, that the word shalom in Parshas Pinchas, the word shalom, there's a custom to slash off the vav in the word shalom to allude to this idea. But let's unpack that just for a second. The idea of the vav, that it brings in the state this consciousness of hitargenut, of becoming organized and connected, which is shalom. So what is that? So what is this alluding to? It's alluding to the idea that when there are disparate parts, what do disparate parts need in order to be able to come together and become organized? They need a central pillar, like it's like what's coming to mind now, like the vision of the totem, like the totem pole. It's like a thing in the center that everyone rallies around. It's this central, staff-like picture that everyone is coming and rallying around. The vav is that centrality. The vav is the centrality that all the disparate parts can come and rally around that thing. So the musar of the os vav is that when a person, either a collective of multiple individuals, or also the individual person himself, right? As we brought from Arot HaKodesh. It's not in this letter, but we brought from Arot HaKodesh in the footnotes over here, that Rav Kook considers the inner battle that an individual has between the different components of his mind, it's the same battle as a group of people are all at odds with each other. It's the same dynamic. So in order to make peace, in order to bring the shalom, the peace, right, which is the shlemut, the wholeness, there needs to be a common goal that everyone is able to rally around. It needs to be something important enough that everyone can identify with, that they're able to rally around that thing. That's what causes shalom, peace. Peace doesn't mean absence of conflict. Peace means shalem, shlemut, like wholeness. It needs to be an active wholeness. So it's the active wholeness that everyone can rally around, that everyone could. That's what brings the vav, the connecting quality that everyone is now bounded together. Everyone's now bound together. So the vav is the idea that we need to, right? It's like I heard very nicely phrased by the famous Tony Robbins. So if a person has trouble waking up in the morning, right? It's because their goals are not inspiring enough. That hits you really hard, right? It's like you have to have something. The vav in a person's life, or a vav in the person's consciousness, is the thing that you are able to rally around. You're able to rally all your kochos and nefesh, all the different parts of your soul are able to rally around that thing. That's the vav, right? That's the avoda of the vav. The vav hachibur, it connects, and by doing that, not only do we connect all the disparate parts together in a rallying, shalom, peacemaking, whole-making type of way, but rather, I just thought of this. Did we talk about this? How like in English, peace means like pieces, and in Lashon HaKodesh, it means the exact opposite. Did we talk about that? I'm just thinking about that right now. That's so interesting. How the word shalom in Lashon HaKodesh means whole, and in English, peace means, it's spelled differently, but still, it's just interesting to think about. Anyway, that it also connects the past and the future. Meaning it connects the past experiences to be able to be projected in the future, and the future goal, right? The thing that's in the future now influences the past. Like you have that vision in the future, it's able to influence the present, like what's going on right now. So there's also a mixing of time. So the inspiring element is the ultimate connector. It's the ultimate shlemut. It's the ultimate peacemaker. It's the ultimate whole maker, and it brings all the disparate pieces together.
How does that connect with the hay, with the individual versus the collective?
How is that a progression from hay? Very good. That's a good question. Anyone have any thoughts? What was the underlying thing from hay? The hay, we said, was that the individual realizing that he's up against a large system of other individuals that he has to contend with.
The yud standing alone.
Huh?
It's the yud standing alone in Dalit. So now
Right.
we have vav connecting the yidden.
Yeah, very simple. Right. If the hay, yeah, that's very good. If the hay of the individual facing the multiplicity, yeah, then the vav is the answer, so to speak, to that. That there's a rallying center, right, that all the disparate parts can be inspired by. Then there's a shalom. There's not a conflict. There's not a chaotic, right, anarchy. But there's a rallying point that everything can get behind, and right, which creates the shalom. Yeah. And just that point that I mentioned that I didn't explain fully, the thing with Pinchas, in Parshas Pinchas, we know that Pinchas has to take a rather extreme and violent action in order to bring peace to the Jewish people. So in the following Parsha, which is called Parshas Pinchas, it says that God rewarded him with what is called the Brit Shalom, the covenant of peace, which means that Pinchas was made a Kohen. He was the only person that was not born a Kohen and was made a Kohen, which is a fascinating thing to think about in and of itself. But it says Briti Shalom, the covenant of peace. Yeah, because he brought wholeness, he brought peace and wholeness to the Jewish people through what he did. However, the custom is to make a slash at the bottom of the vav to show that peace is not like the most ideal. It's not. It's sorry, in the Torah. Yeah. In the actual letter in the Torah, you'll see the custom of most sofrim is to make a small slash at the bottom of the vav, not in a way that it invalidates the letter, obviously, but in order to give expression to this idea that the shalom that was made was not ideal. Meaning, this was certainly a rally, like a very loud action that everyone kind of paid attention to and influenced everyone for sure. But it was done. It is not the ideal form of doing. Like ideally, we should have something that everyone can actively be inspired by, as opposed to shocked into obedience by. Yeah. So it's alluding to that idea. Tov, Yishar Koach. I think we did pretty good for the first Chazara.
Excellent.
Just
Amazing.
when you forgot, yeah. And what Tony Robbins would have done.